I've seen enough cowboy movies on TV, so I know what real justice is.
Well, they should have just took a tree and hung him.
Well, he did break the law. There's no argument there.
The incident itself was deplorable.
His political mindset was central to this case.
Just before moving to John Day, I purchased some property, initially 720 acres, about 10 miles away in some forested land adjacent to National Forest. It had been heavily overgrazed by generations of overuse, and we considered that to be a good opportunity to do some restoration to the land and also have a good place where we could eventually move and live on. What we did was immediately fence the property, put a 4-strand barbed wire fence there, and surrounded the property. Our efforts were confounded early on by frequent trespass of our property by range cattle owned by one of my neighbors. 20 cattle on along a stream for 2 weeks' time can essentially bulldoze half a mile or several hundred yards at any rate of stream side. This, of course, was quite frustrating, and when I first saw the cows on after having constructed my fence, I thought, this is ridiculous. I spent probably $4,000 a mile constructing 5 miles of fence. And this is not something you pay for with Visa or take a line of credit out on. If someone builds a fence, you pay them cash. You could probably do a real good version of America's Funniest Home Videos if you were to film somebody on foot trying to herd range cattle off of their property. I was wasting a whole lot of time rounding up and seeing to the welfare of Mr. Sproul's cattle. So I shot him.
We were looking for an upstanding citizen in Eastern Oregon, someone who had a lot of community respect, and I was referred to Dr. Shipsey by an acquaintance as someone who felt strongly about how the lands were being managed and abused by livestock.
The captain of the Clean Streams Initiative was Bill Marlette with the Oregon Natural Desert Association in Bend. And he called me one day in the fall of 1995 and asked me if I would be a chief petitioner. Just briefly, the measure stated, if you graze cattle along a stream, along waters of the state, if that stream is polluted or degraded, and if in fact the cause for that pollution or degradation is largely or substantially because of your livestock, then you need to get them off of the creek until it recovers.
It would have been devastating. It would have been devastating to our whole industry, because if you could imagine the entire state fenced, the streams, the waterways, all of the waterways fenced, the added expense of having to get water to the livestock some way other than letting them go to the water wouldn't have looked very good. To have all the streams fenced wouldn't have been good for the face of Oregon. So the impact needed to be shown to the public who were going to vote on that. That visual impact needed to be shown. as well as trying to get our story out that the cattle are not damaging waterways.
There's no question that grazing is the major factor when you're talking about streams not meeting standards. And if they don't meet standards, they're not supporting the beneficial uses. The main beneficial use that we're concerned about is salmon, steelhead, and trout.
But I really fouled things up. I shot the cows within about 2 weeks of the election. So I took a measure that was going to be defeated, I think, fairly much with certainty, and got it crushed. Did a lot of damage. I lost a lot of friends. I will always regret that very deeply, the timing, not so much the act, but the timing as related to the situation with the ballot measure and the politics involved.
Criminal mischief in the first degree were the primary charges, and they were backed up by a crime called unlawful, I believe it was unlawful use or unlawful transport or unlawful use of a livestock animal, which were really, those were all misdemeanor charges. The focus was really on the felony charges, criminal mischief in the first degree.
As it turned out, already having been labeled as an environmentalist in Grant County, Oregon, which is eastern Oregon, which is right up there with child molester as far as status is concerned. There was tremendous pressure on the district attorney to the point of outright threats. Basically, you go for felony convictions, you take this all the way down the line, or you're going to get recalled.
The district attorney, I'm sure, felt some pressure at the outset from the Cattlemen's Association and the ranchers in Grant County and so forth. I personally did not, because I was divorced from that, coming in as a special prosecutor. The inference that I drew is that when Shipsey saw the cows up there, he wasn't thinking in terms of protecting the ecosystem on his property. He was thinking, damn it, I told that old man to keep his cows off my property, and I'm not going to have some old codger like that not doing what I tell him to do. That's what I believe happened, and it was with anger that he shot those cows, and it didn't have anything to do with his environmental concerns on his property.
In a pretrial motion, the prosecutor asked, shall we just stick to the time from when I entered my property that day, the shooting of the cows, did I do it or not? And the judge agreed to that and essentially obliterated our entire defense, such that I was allowed to say, when he asked me, did you shoot the cows, I was allowed to say, yes, but, and then he would say, no buts.
Now, Shipsey's somebody, as you know, who wants to be in the limelight all the time, and this was a good way to keep himself in the limelight. And he wanted to have his trial. What he and his attorneys didn't anticipate was that the state would file a pretrial motion to suppress a lot of their evidence, and that the state would be successful. I'm certain that took them by surprise.
And our next step at this point is to take it to appeals and argue that we need to be allowed our defense.
First, we just knew that Dr. Shipsey was a suspect, and then quite, I think, late in the day we learned that he had been charged. And of course, that was pretty big news coming in the midst of the campaign, and he had been putting ads in the paper. And so we wrote a story that, of course, got a bit of prominence, and wrote that story quite late in the day, and it ran on the front page.
I didn't really read that many articles in the Oregonian. They sent us some copies of some of the articles. There seemed to be a lack of balance.
The cattlemen have been, I think, concerned about the coverage. We tried real hard to talk with the Cattle Association before our bigger stories went out, and to people who were directly affected.
The intent seemed to be to paint a negative picture about the cattle and the cattleman, and a positive one about Dr. Shipsey. And I feel that was intentional.
Hal, unfortunately, was new to the issue. He had come from Alaska, and it was, I think, too steep a curve for him to really understand the issues, and more importantly, understand how the industry has a lock on state politics and how they really do control the agenda in terms of environmental legislation in the state. And I think that, as good as he is, he was a little bit naive walking into this issue, and I think gave more than fair play to the opposition's point of view.
We get calls no matter which way we go. I mean, no matter how fair we try to be, we get calls from both sides saying, you slammed us. That's not fair. We can't inform them as well as a 4-page write-up in the Oregonian that really specifically targets a ballot title and what it's all about. But our industry can kind of bring out the emotions of the issue and show it in a way that print can't.
The environmentalists describe us, and that's always our problem. We're out doing the cattle thing, working with our cattle, and cattle ranchers don't have time to go to town and tell you our story. And that's why I guess, I said, you come over here, because you're not going to know what we do until you do come over here.
I think it's hard to get a clear, accurate picture of what's going on out there unless you go there. And unfortunately, it's just too difficult, and it's not my coverage area. My viewers don't live in LeGrand.
The Dr. Shipsey story, it did get really polarized. There were a lot of people who were, very angry at him. But we also tried to find the people who weren't and thought that was wrong. There wasn't a lot of middle ground in John Day on that issue. There were some people who were his supporters, but there wasn't a lot of middle ground. We tried to reflect where the opinions were.
No, I don't think he learned anything. He needed more punishment.
Well, they should have just took a tree and hung him for killing all those animals, all those people that were going hungry. They could have used that meat.
I really don't have an opinion.
Oh, I'm the daughter of a rancher, and I don't think he should have shot him, but I also don't think the cows should have been on his land. I do think that's a problem, but we do have open range here, so.
Well, I think he kind of got what he deserved. Here in the county, why, if you live here, you know that we have open range, and you got, if you don't want to accept it, then I guess you have to live somewhere else. And I think he took the law in his own hands when there was no reason to. I mean, I've bordered Bob Sproul for years, and Bob and I were always good neighbors. I understood that, I kept my end of the fence up, and we never had any problems.
The impacts are, fairly evident. The science is there. There's no question that livestock are a major factor in screwing up a lot of habitat.
Find the truth, question what you're being told, because so much of the time the story is not right. And Bill Marlett is a typical example. He cited science. He hasn't got science. He has a person who is a scientist that's part of his organization that writes an article. They do a review of literature, and she'll go to literature and pick out what she wants. That's what we call pseudoscience.
But when you're talking about the extinction of species and you have people trying to deny what good science is and really clinging in desperation to some of the bad, well, science, if science is, you know. And so then you have two things that are going to get hurt. One is that good science might be able to help the rural communities, the ranchers. There can be better ways of doing things. So they go down the tubes. And the second thing that we have to see is that there is a role for watersheds.
So, you know, scientific literature is pretty minimal in terms of showing cause and effect. There's a lot of correlations, and I don't think anybody even argues that poor grazing is bad. The question is good grazing bad? And there's virtually no literature on that.
I will agree that the critical experiments have not been done. But the correlative information is so overwhelming that the weight of the evidence is in our favor.
There are ways of looking at natural resources where you can say, what can we do to guarantee preservation of the natural resources with no other considerations whatsoever, and lead down one vein of research and science and even interpretation of the results. Another way to look at it might be, what can we do to use the resources as responsibly as we possibly can? That'll lead to a little different trail and a little different way of looking at information, with the ideas coming out. When you get done, we expect use to happen. Now, my personal research has followed the latter, that I'm interested in helping people find out how to use the natural resources in the state of Oregon, mostly on private lands, to the benefit of their family and their economics, at the same time to sustain that activity in perpetuity, because every one of these families expects to give that ranch to their kids and have it continue to prosper over time.
You have to understand that the community out in eastern Oregon is in a panic. There are things beyond their control. They're really economically, the profit margin is so skinny that it's going to be a hard time for a lot of people.
Poverty is the worst enemy of conservation, because people that are in poverty can't afford to do things that make the resources better. They're just trying to get by.
This is just not about a battle only of ideas. The consequences for these ideas have a major impact on human existence. The longer we delay so some people can defend their economic interest, it puts the rest of society in jeopardy.
I'm not too worried about the world unraveling in those kinds of problems occurring, because I don't think it's happening. The fish problems are related to a whole variety of factors, some of which are ocean conditions, some of which are conditions in the bigger rivers, some of which are conditions in the smaller tributaries. Some of it is probably just normal cycles in populations. And the fish will be back there someday when the conditions are right and it's time to come back. So I don't worry about that a lot.
The scientist has got to maintain their credibility and their objectivity. You put the science there on the table. Where a scientist does get in trouble is when the scientist is perceived as having an axe to grind.
I think if anything's going to damage natural resources in the long run is having science always questioned, you know, whose science is it good or bad? There really isn't good science and bad science. And we shouldn't be moving in that direction, but I worry that we are, and to me that's probably the crisis that's at hand.
Well, I believe that the Oregon plan has a very significant component of it that's voluntary and cooperative, but it's built on the strongest regulatory baseline in the West. Now, it's probably not as strong a regulatory baseline as environmentalists or public interest advocates might suggest, but the point here is you need a conservation plan that gets at least a B for its biology and at least a C for its psychology.
We have to bring some reason into the Clean Water Act and into the Endangered Species Act, and the only way we're going to do that is to draw a line and say we're not going to buy into nonsense.
The issue isn't where you start. The issue is how you work together to end up where you need to end up. And I think the water quality standards do a good job of sending a shot across the bow that, hey, things aren't healthy everywhere. And furthermore, the trend of things is not healthy, and we need to basically come together as a people and do what we can do about it.
It's an uphill battle with the governor's attitude, an environmentalist, a green, part of the green politics, talking about cooperation and working together, but what that means is doing what he wants done, not working together. That's not a partnership. Do as I say is not a partnership.
There are always going to be people who are not interested in playing by anybody's rules and really don't, give a damn about the land or the health of the land or whether salmon go extinct. So those people need to be held accountable, and that's why we have laws. And the Oregonian and Governor Kitzhaber think that we can get by without laws. The Oregon plan clearly shows that we can recover salmon stocks throughout Oregon just if we all hold hands and voluntarily go out and do what's right. And I think he's in for a big surprise.
For those environmentalists who think we should just jam it to everybody to accomplish these goals, I'd like you to show me just one example anywhere in the country where that's working. We've tried that before, and it hasn't worked. We'd like to give this a chance, and we think that the track record of this effort will, over time, prove itself out. And if we are wildly Pollyanna and too optimistic, there'll be plenty of opportunity for more regulatory hardline approaches to follow up and backdrop up. I just honestly believe that doesn't make sense for most Oregonians. We've got an issue here that most people want to happen. Most people want salmon restored and want water quality improved. Now, we can screw that up with poor tactics and strategy, but I'd prefer not to.
We're apolitical. The cattlemen are apolitical. We just want to be kind of left alone to do what we do, so we can keep it all together for the next generation.
We have to pull together as a community, because there's not one of us without sin. Not one of us. City dwellers, perhaps even more. Take a look at what runs off our streets during a big storm and goes into the rivers.
The way I look at it, the government has kind of slowed down the two sides, the friction, because there is action to try to intermediate the arguments, I guess.
This has been a setback, and I hope that there will be some good that comes from all of this controversy as well. Would I do it over again? I would do it over again maybe 3 weeks later than I did the last time, but I think that under the circumstances my options and my actions were very much justified.